Welcome back to Stamps US, where we uncover the history, hidden details, and real market value of old American stamps. Today, we are looking at a beautiful red 2-cent George Washington stamp that may look familiar to many collectors, but this particular design belongs to an important period in American stamp history. And before you believe the huge prices you sometimes see online, stay with me, because identifying the exact stamp and checking its condition can make a massive difference in the real collector market. The stamp shown here appears to be the 1916 2-cent Washington Carmine stamp, Scott number 463. This stamp was issued on September 25, 1916, and is known for its carmine color, flat plate printing, on watermarked paper, and perforation gauge 10. Collectors also recognize this Washington design by the denomination style often called 2 cents 2. Look closely at the stamp and you can see George Washington's classic profile portrait in the center. Around him is a beautiful oval frame decorated with laurel leaves, while the words U.S. postage appear across the top. At the bottom, the denomination 2 cents is clearly displayed. The design is simple compared with some modern stamps, but the engraved detail gives this old Washington issue a very distinctive appearance. Now, here is the question that many people ask when they find a stamp like this in an old collection. Could this 2-cent red Washington stamp be worth thousands of dollars? The honest answer is that the exact variety and condition must be checked first. A standard Scott number 463 is not automatically a $1 million stamp. Current dealer listings show a common example around $7.50, while high-quality examples and rare collecting formats can bring much more. And this is where stamp collecting becomes very interesting. The 1916 Washington issue is part of the Washington-Franklin era, a period when collectors had to examine details such as perforations, paper, watermark status, printing method, and design type. The stamp shown here may look almost identical to other red 2-cent Washington stamps, but those small differences can determine the exact catalog number and value. The perforations are especially important. On Scott number 463, the perforation is 10, and the stamp is printed on unwatermarked paper. Without checking these details carefully, it is impossible to confidently identify every similar-looking Washington stamp from this period. This is why serious collectors use tools such as a perforation gauge and sometimes additional methods to examine the paper and stamp characteristics. Now let's talk honestly about the stamp in the image. The photograph shows a noticeable horizontal crease or fold running across the stamp. That is important because condition is one of the biggest factors in the stamp market. Collectors carefully look for creases, tears, thinning, stains, missing perforations, and other damage. A stamp with a serious crease can be worth far less than a fresh, perfectly preserved example of the same catalog number. This is a very important lesson for anyone watching stamp value videos. The same stamp can have completely different prices depending on condition. A standard example may sell for only a few dollars, while a superb, perfectly centered, professionally graded example can bring hundreds of dollars. Auction records show exceptional Scott number 463 examples selling for hundreds, including a superb 98 grade example recorded at $350 and other top-quality examples selling for even more. But remember, those high prices are for exceptional quality. They are not the normal value of every red 2-cent Washington stamp. This is where many people make a mistake. They search online, find a $500 or $1,000 listing, and assume their own stamp must be worth the same amount. But an asking price is not the same as a confirmed sale, and condition can make an enormous difference. So, what is the honest value of the stamp shown here? Based on the image, it appears to be a 1916 2-cent Washington Scott number 463, but the visible crease and the need to confirm the perforation and other characteristics mean that I would not call it a high-value investment stamp from the photograph alone. A normal example may be worth several dollars, while exceptional examples can be worth much more. And this is exactly why you should never throw away an old stamp just because it looks common. Washington stamps were produced in many different issues and varieties. The portrait may look almost the same, but the year, perforation, paper, watermark, and printing details can tell a completely different story. If you have a similar red 2-cent Washington stamp, carefully check the perforations around the edges. Look closely at the paper and inspect the back of the stamp. And if you notice a crease like the one shown here, remember that condition must be considered before making any value claim. This stamp may not be a hidden $1 million treasure, but it is still a fascinating piece of American postal history from the 1916 Washington-Franklin era. And that is what makes stamp collecting so exciting. Sometimes the most important discovery is not a massive price tag, but correctly identifying the tiny details that tell the stamp's real story. Next up, we are looking at a beautiful rose carmine 2-cent stamp featuring John Adams, the second president of the United States. At first glance, this stamp may look like a rare and extremely valuable piece of American history, but the real story is even more interesting. The exact identification of this stamp, its history, and its condition are all important when determining its true collector value. The stamp shown here is the 1938 2-cent John Adams Presidential Series stamp, Scott number 806. This stamp was issued on June 3, 1938, as part of the famous 1938 Presidential Series, often called the Prexies by collectors. The 2-cent denomination was assigned to John Adams because he was the second president of the United States. The National Postal Museum explains that the denominations in this series followed the order of the presidency, with Washington on the 1-cent stamp and Adams on the 2-cent stamp. Look closely at the design. The stamp features a portrait of John Adams in the center, with the words United States postage at the top. The denomination 2 cents too appears along the bottom, while the dates 1735 to 1826 identify the life of John Adams. The rose carmine color gives this stamp a very attractive appearance, and the portrait was inspired by a marble bust of Adams created by Daniel Chester French and displayed in the U.S. Capitol's Senate Gallery. Now, here is the question every collector wants answered. Could this old 2-cent John Adams stamp be worth thousands or even millions of dollars? The honest answer is that a normal Scott number 806 is generally not a $1 million rarity. In fact, more than 25 billion examples were issued, making the standard stamp very common. Current dealer listings show a regular Scott number 806 pane single around 25 cents, while special booklet varieties can be worth considerably more. But do not let the word common make you think this stamp is uninteresting. The 1938 Presidential Series is one of the most famous U.S. definitive stamp issues ever produced. These stamps were used for many years, from 1938 into the mid-1950s, and they were created to honor deceased American presidents. The series included a large group of denominations and became a favorite among collectors. The most important thing to understand is that not every John Adams 2-cent stamp is exactly the same. The regular sheet stamp is Scott number 806, but collectors also recognize other formats and varieties. The 2-cent Adams design was produced as a sheet stamp, a vertical coil, a horizontal coil, and a booklet issue. The Smithsonian's National Postal Museum specifically notes these different formats, and that is where careful identification becomes extremely important. Now look at the stamp shown in this image. It appears to be the regular Scott number 806 sheet stamp, not one of the scarce coil varieties. The perforations and overall design are important clues, but a clear back image and careful perforation measurement are always recommended before making a final identification. A photograph can help identify the stamp, but it cannot prove every variety or condition detail. And now let's talk about condition. This is one of the biggest factors in the stamp market. Collectors examine the perforations, centering, color, gum, and any damage. A stamp with missing perforations, a crease, tear, or heavy stain can be worth much less than a clean example. On the other hand, special varieties, booklet stamps, or unusual production features can attract much more attention from collectors. So, what is the honest market value of this stamp? Based on the image and the identification as the regular 1938 2-cent John Adams Scott number 806, the common example is generally a low-value collectible, often around the cents to dollar range depending on condition and format. A current dealer reference lists a regular pane single at about 25 cents, while a special booklet pane single is listed at $22.50. This is a perfect example of why the exact format matters so much. And this is where many people make a huge mistake. They search online and find a John Adams stamp listed for hundreds or thousands of dollars, then assume their own stamp must be worth the same amount. But an asking price is not necessarily a real market value. The exact Scott number, condition, format, and variety must all be checked before claiming a high price. Still, this stamp is an important piece of American history. John Adams was not only the second president of the United States, but also a major figure in the early history of the nation. He served as George Washington's vice president before becoming president himself, and he played an important role during the founding years of the United States. The stamp gives collectors a small, beautifully engraved connection to that history. So, if you have this rose carmine John Adams stamp in an old collection, do not immediately throw it away. First, identify the exact issue. Check the perforations and the back of the stamp. Look for signs that it may be a coil, booklet, or another special format. And remember, a common stamp can still be a fascinating piece of history even when its market price is low. The 1938 2-cent John Adams stamp may not be a hidden million-dollar treasure, but it is part of one of America's most famous presidential stamp series. And in stamp collecting, the real excitement often comes from discovering the tiny details that separate one stamp from another. Next up, we are exploring one of the most interesting vintage United States postage stamps, the 2-cent John Greenleaf Whittier stamp. If you have discovered this stamp in an old family collection, a forgotten album, or a box of vintage mail, you may be wondering whether it is a common stamp or a hidden treasure. Stay with me until the end because I'll explain its history, the features collectors look for, and what this stamp could be worth in today's collector market. The 2-cent John Greenleaf Whittier stamp was issued by the United States Postal Service as part of the famous American series to honor John Greenleaf Whittier, one of America's most respected poets, writers, and abolitionists. His work had a major influence on American literature during the 19th century, and this stamp was created to recognize his lasting contribution to the country's history and culture. The detailed portrait, the elegant red color, and the classic engraved design have made this stamp a favorite among collectors for many years. At first glance, this stamp may appear ordinary, but experienced collectors know that small details can make a huge difference. The first thing to examine is the condition of the stamp. Look carefully at the corners, perforations, color, and centering. A stamp with bright color, sharp perforations, and perfect centering is usually much more desirable than one with heavy wear or damage. Collectors also check whether the stamp is mint with its original gum or used with a cancellation mark. Mint examples are generally worth more because they have never been used for postage. The stamp shown here is a used example with a postmark, which means it was actually used to mail a letter. Used stamps are usually more common, but collectors still appreciate them when they are clean, well-centered, and lightly cancelled. A heavy cancellation, tears, thin spots, missing perforations, stains, or fading can reduce the value considerably. Another important factor is identifying the exact variety. Some stamps that look almost identical may have differences in printing, paper, watermark, perforations, or plate varieties. These small differences can dramatically increase the value of a stamp. That is why experienced collectors always compare their stamps with a specialized catalog before deciding on a price. So, what is this stamp worth today? Most ordinary used examples of the 2-cent John Greenleaf Whittier stamp typically sell for around 25 cents to $5, depending on their condition and appearance. Nice mint examples with original gum often sell for $10 to $50. However, stamps with exceptional centering, rare printing varieties, plate errors, or professionally graded high-quality examples may sell for $100 or even several $100s at auctions if they meet the requirements collectors are looking for. While most examples are affordable, the rare varieties are the ones that excite serious collectors. If you believe you own a valuable example, avoid cleaning or repairing the stamp because that can reduce its value. Instead, store it in a protective stamp mount or album and, if necessary, have it examined by a professional stamp expert or grading service. Proper identification is one of the most important steps in determining the true market value of any vintage stamp. Stamp collecting is more than simply buying and selling. Every stamp tells a story about history, culture, famous people, and the time in which it was issued. The John Greenleaf Whittier stamp is a wonderful example of how a small piece of paper can preserve the legacy of an important historical figure while becoming a collectible enjoyed by people around the world. Next up, we are taking a close look at one of the most famous and valuable classic United States revenue stamps ever issued, the 1902 Series $2 James Madison stamp. At first glance, it may look like an ordinary old blue stamp, but collectors know that this historic issue has fascinated philatelists for more than a century. If you have found one of these stamps in an old collection, family album, or estate, you might be wondering whether it is worth only a few dollars or if it could be a hidden treasure. Stay with me as we explore its history, rarity, and current collector value. This impressive stamp was issued in 1902 as part of the United States documentary revenue stamp series. Unlike ordinary postage stamps that were used to mail letters, revenue stamps were created to pay taxes on legal documents, financial transactions, stock certificates, insurance papers, and other official records. The $2 denomination was one of the higher values in the series, making it an important stamp for significant financial documents of its time. The stamp features James Madison, the fourth President of the United States and one of the principal authors of the United States Constitution. His portrait appears in the center of an elegant engraved design surrounded by detailed ornaments and the large $2 denomination on both sides. The beautiful blue color and intricate engraving make this one of the most attractive revenue stamps produced by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. When evaluating this stamp, collectors pay close attention to several important details. The first is the condition. Sharp perforations, strong color, clean paper, and good centering always increase desirability. Collectors also examine whether the stamp has any tears, folds, creases, stains, thin spots, or missing perforations, since these flaws can significantly reduce its value. The quality of the cancellation also matters. Light, attractive cancellations are usually preferred over heavy or messy ones. Another major factor is identifying the exact variety. The 1902 Revenue series contains several printing varieties, paper types, and documentary usages. Some examples were printed in relatively small quantities, while others survived in very limited numbers. Rare varieties, unusual cancellations, plate varieties, or stamps still attached to their original legal documents can command substantial premiums in the collector market. Now let's discuss the value. A typical used 1902 $2 James Madison Revenue stamp in average condition generally sells for approximately $20 to $100. Well-preserved examples with excellent centering and attractive appearance often bring $150 to $400. Mint, never hinged examples with original gum are much scarcer and can sell for $500 to over $2,000, depending on their condition and certification. Exceptionally rare varieties, high-grade professionally graded examples, or stamps with unique historical document usage have been known to sell for several $1,000s at major stamp auctions. If you own one of these stamps, avoid cleaning or repairing it because even small alterations can reduce its collector value. Store it safely in a protective stamp mount or album and consider having it authenticated by a professional philatelic expert if you believe it may be a rare variety or a high-grade example. Certification can make a significant difference when selling valuable classic revenue stamps. The 1902 James Madison $2 revenue stamp is more than just a collectible. It represents an important chapter in American financial history, government taxation, and stamp engraving. Its historical importance, beautiful design, and strong collector demand continue to make it one of the most respected classic United States revenue stamps. Thank you for watching Stamp World. If you enjoy discovering rare stamps, learning about their history, and exploring their current market values, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week we feature fascinating stamps from around the world, revealing hidden treasures that many people overlook. Leave a comment below if you own this James Madison revenue stamp or any other classic United States stamp, and tell us which stamp you would like to see featured next. Happy collecting, and I'll see you in the next video.